Welcome back, folks. We're going to talk more about clauses. We talked about the independent clause and the subordinate clause. And we're going to talk today about recognizing them when we come across complex sentences. As we'll discover later, complex sentences are is the name given to sentences that contain both independent and dependent or subordinate clauses. So let's talk about recognizing clauses because that's going to be important to all that. First of all, independent clauses, by way of review, are complete thoughts. They don't contain subordinators. Subordinate clauses are incomplete thoughts, and they're incomplete because they contain subordinators that tie them to other needed information. Again, that's kind of review. Question is, how do we find clauses? And a second question, how do we tell an independent clause from a subordinate clause when we see it in a sentence? The answers, I suggest, are as follows. I suggest we start by finding verbs. You can also look for subordinators. We'll talk about that in a minute. Kind of, if we do those at the same time, that will help. But for finding clauses themselves, I think really the best thing to do is to look for verbs. Then find the subjects of those verbs. Once you've done that, you can find the clauses, because every clause is what? They got to contain what? What did we say defines a clause? A clause is a group of words that work together and have both a subject and a verb. So if we can find the verb and its subject, we got a grasp on a good starting grasp at least on the clause. Then we really just need to find any other things in the predicate following the verb that go with that clause. And we'll do some examples where we practice that. Once we found our clauses, we separate them. The second question, how do we tell an independent clause from a subordinate clause? The key there is to look for the subordinator. This process will kind of go on at the same time, and in fact, finding a subordinator will help us find and separate a subordinate clause, but let's try to tackle it step by step in the following examples. Here I'm going to use some different colored pens to try to mark out what we're finding as we go. First I'm going to use green to mark out our verbs. Let's go through the sentence, shall we? This is the flavor that I like. What's the first verb we find? Is a linking verb. That I like. Like is also a verb, correct? All right, so we've got our verbs. What about our subjects? I'll underline the subjects in red. What is the flavor that I like? This. This, a demonstrative pronoun, is the subject of is. Let's go look for like. Who or what is doing the liking? I like. So there's subject 1, verb 1, subject 2, verb 2. Where's the dividing line? Well, if we're keeping our eyes open for subordinators, they can give us a hint. Where's the subordinator between them? This is a flavor that I like. That I like. Isn't that a subordinator? Well, another way to check is where would we break these apart that makes sense? This is the flavor that? I don't think so. This is the flavor. That makes more sense as a group. And how about that I like? That I like makes sense. It's not a complete thought. As we'll see in a minute as we look at it, it has to be a subordinate clause, but we can see that I like is a lot more sensible than this is the flavor that. So that's our break point. Here we have our independent clause. Let me grab a black pen for that. Put it in a box. And our subordinate clause right here. Again, that, our subordinator, a relative pronoun, directs us to the point where they break. It's the thing that connects them. Let's move on to the next example. When I go home, I always watch TV. Hope you got more of a life than that. But let's look for our verbs. When I go. Okay, go's a verb. There's our first one. Next, as we move on down, I always watch. Watch is a verb, right? Okay. Now let's go back and find our subjects. Who's going? I go. Who's watching? I always watch. All right, there we've got our subjects. Now, where would we break them? When I go home, I always watch TV. Sure seems natural that the break point would be right, let me get the right color pen, right here. I always watch TV. Does that stand alone? Is that like a sentence? Sure it is. So that is an independent clause. On the other hand, over here, when I go home, it makes some sense, but can it stand alone? No, not really. I go home can stand alone, but when I go home demands more information. It's incomplete, so we have our subordinate clause. Example number 3. Let's find our verbs again. I eat snacks because I'm hungry. First verb I see is eat. How about you? Going further, snacks because I am. There's our other verb. So we got our verbs. Where are our subjects? Who eats? I eat. Who is hungry or am hungry? I am hungry. All right? I eat snacks because, well, that doesn't make sense. We have to stop here because here's the next subject and verb. But it makes more sense to break it at I eat snacks and keep that together, and because I am hungry, because that makes more sense, and keep that together. However, because I'm hungry can't really stand alone, can it? No, it can't. It needs more information. So that's our subordinate clause. On the other hand, I eat snacks. How does that do? Can that stand alone? Is that really like a sentence? Yes, it is. I eat snacks is the independent clause. Very good. Let's go on to some more examples. Got a couple tricky ones at the bottom of this. We'll talk about them as we get there. Nobody knows who I am. Well, hopefully that's not true of you, but let's look for our verbs. First verb, nobody knows. To know, that's a verb. Who I am, again, to be, linking verb. So those are our verbs. Where are our subjects of those verbs? Who knows? Nobody knows. Who is, am, was, or were? I am. So there we have it. Where's the break point? Shall we say nobody knows who? Or shall we say nobody knows? And is it better to say nobody knows as clause 1 and who I am as clause 2? I think so. Certainly say nobody knows who is a weird clause. That wouldn't make sense. And again, we can start to recognize now, can't you, that who is one of those relative pronouns that would bridge the gap between an independent clause and a subordinate clause? Sure we do. We can start to see that now. And the subordinator always belongs to the subordinate clause. It's part of that clause. So this is our subordinate clause. Who I am. Remember, that can't stand alone. What who I am. We need more information. And then over here, our independent clause, nobody knows. Now, nobody knows doesn't tell you much, but what it tells you is complete. So it is an independent clause. Let's go on to the next one. Since you asked, I'll tell you. What are our verbs? Since you asked. Asked is a verb, past tense of to ask. I'll tell you. A little trickier here. We have a verb phrase, don't we? Kind of future. I will tell you. Again, maybe it's helpful sometimes to break out contractions and note what they really are. This really is the word will, isn't that? I will tell you. So will tell, helping verb plus main verb, is a verb phrase. All right, let's find their subject, shall we? Who asked? You asked. Who will tell you? I will tell you. So there we have a nice break in between them right there. Since you asked, I will tell you. Now, which can stand alone? I will tell you. Yeah, that stands alone. So let's mark that as our independent clause. Put the right pen for that here. That's our IC. Which one doesn't stand alone? Since you asked. Since you asked. Can you just leave folks hanging there? No, that's not a complete thought. So that's our subordinate clause. All right. A little bit trickier yet. The gift that you gave me was nice. Let's look at this closely. Let's find our verbs. The gift that you gave, there we go, past tense of to give, that's a verb. Me was, now that's another verb, linking verb to be. Well, where are the subjects though? Okay, who gave me? You gave me, that one's easy. But what was nice? Me was nice? No, that goes with you gave me. What was nice? The gift was nice. So what we're seeing now is that gift is connected to was. What's happened here is we've split a clause. The gift was nice, and stuck up in the middle of it another clause. That you gave me. By the way, while we're on it, which one contains the subordinator? Isn't it this one here? That you gave me. And doesn't having a subordinator mean that it must be a subordinate clause? Bingo, it does. This is our subordinate clause right here. I'll circle it this time because we have the pieces broken. So what's our independent clause? It must be the words that are left. Let's find them. The gift was nice. Yeah, that makes sense. That's like a sentence. It's a standalone. The gift, this time I'll underline it, was nice. This split thing here is the independent clause. Not two independent clauses, one independent clause, but a split independent clause. IC, same IC is over here. In fact, if I'm gonna put IC twice, I'm gonna draw a bridge to remind us this is one IC, one independent clause. So a little trickier, be looking for that, where dependent subordinate clauses are tucked up inside, split and put in the middle of an independent clause. And why? Why did that happen? Why did they do that? Because, and this leads into a future video lesson, because this subordinate clause is working as a simple part of speech, an adjective, telling us more information about the gift. Just like we could say the big gift, the pretty gift, all adjectives telling us about what kind of gift. That you gave me also tells us about what kind of gift. This whole clause, just as we've seen with phrases before, this whole clause can be an adjective, and indeed it is. In fact, we'll learn later, we'll call this an adjective clause. And in fact, there's more information about that I won't go into right now. So the gift that you gave me was nice. Split independent clause, subordinate clause right in the middle. Last example, a little trickier yet, down below. Let's look for our verbs. The girl you like dropped by. Okay. The girl you, like, isn't that a verb? Sure. Dropped by, isn't that a verb? It really is. It's a verb phrase. Certainly dropped is a verb. This is really a verb phrase meaning to visit. By is in some cases a preposition, but not here. It's part of a verb phrase. It's like to pick up, to drop by. So there are two verbs. And the confusing thing is they're right in front of each other. What are the subjects? Let's see if we can find them. Start with the easy one. What's the subject of like? Who liked? Well, you like. That's who's doing the liking. But dropped by. Who or what dropped by? Oh, it's like the last one. The girl dropped by. So this girl goes with drop by. You goes with like. So we've got the girl dropped by. You like was just tucked up in there to give us more information about which girl. But where's our subordinator? The answer is, it's not stated. The girl you like is really the girl that you like. We just didn't bother saying it. And that's the tricky part sometimes in speech. We will drop things out. Just like when we say welcome to someone. We're really saying, I welcome you. But I cup my hands around my mouth, kind of like a parenthesis, to remind you that we're not saying the I and we're not saying the you. We just understand they're there. The same thing occurs here when we drop out our relative pronouns. We really should be saying, if we're going to be disclosing everything, the girl that you like dropped by. But we didn't ever say it. We just said the girl you like dropped by. Watch for that. I don't want you to get tripped up by that. It may be a little bit tricky sometimes. Sometimes the relative pronoun or other subordinator may not be mentioned. But that's what we've got. And in fact, we've talked about it enough. We should probably circle it. That's our subordinator. What does it go with? That you like. Well, it means this all is a subordinate clause. And what's our independent clause? The girl dropped by. Just pull that subordinate clause out. And what remains is the independent clause. I'll just underline it in black so you can see that it continues over here. That's our IC. All right? Hope that helps.